goal now of putting this into practice in step 15 here is we're going to add a picture, okay, using a one-to-one model uh, with the patient. So we'll just have two versions though of the profile picture. Now, as we mentioned before, you get big, huge images these days from even things like smartphones and so on. We're never going to save for this profile picture a full size copy. We're always going to shrink it down. We're just going to shrink it down by how much. We're going to save two different versions, one shrunk down to a reasonable size to show if it's uh, like a details page where we're focusing on one patient, and then a thumbnail size version of the same image to show on places like the index, right? So I got my copy paste file here. You can grab your copy and follow along, and away you go, right? So here I am back in Visual Studio. So we've added our utility. We did the install package. By the way, if I double click the project here, you can see the package reference for SkiaSharp there with the version that was installed. That's the latest and greatest version, and so on and so forth. All right, so just pointing that out. We have all that in place. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by, I'll be coming back to that. I'll close it for now. We're going to start by adding the models. Now, there's more than one way you could set this up. Truth is, of course, we already have our uploaded files, right? And I could try to reuse that and I could make it work, but I don't really see any advantage. You're not going to save, anything in terms of the storage in the database, and you're adding a bit of complexity because then we always have to worry about, which ones are the images and which ones are other files and so on. So I think it's simpler to just do it as separate models, right? Even though it's kind of the same kind of an animal in the end. So we're going to add two new classes here. Again, you could do this in more than one way, but I find this is easy to understand and easy to work with because later on we can decide to include one or the other, right? So we're going to have patient photo is sort of the larger size version of our image that we upload, and then patient thumbnail class will be the smaller version, right? Now, the properties in both are exactly the same, right? I'll just talk about them in one or the other. Doesn't matter which here. Oh, Control B, that works better. Okay, so I'm setting them up this way. So they each actually have their own integer identity primary key. That's fine. What does this look like? Normal, every day. We've seen this a gazillion times. This indicates this is a foreign key, right? So we have the patient, that's our parent object that relates back to, right? And then we have the patient ID, the foreign key stored inside, in this case, patient photo, that relates back to the ID of the patient, right? So you might say, well, that looks like a one-to-many. Well, the reason why it's going to function as a one-to-one is in the parent, in the patient, right? We're not going to have an I collection, okay? We're only going to have a single instance of these. So let's come to patient. And maybe down here near the bottom where I have these other, you know, I collections and so on. Here is where I'm going to throw in two properties, one for each separately. Yes, you could try to be clever and combine them into one and load different, uh, content and so on. But this makes it nice, simple, and it's easy. We don't get as confused, I think, with this approach overall, right? Okay, so we'll have the patient photo and the patient thumbnail. Now, when we do our link query to pull the data from the database, we'll only include one or the other for display purposes. Twist on that, I'll mention it now, is the fact that if we're going to actually manipulate, okay, maybe we just want to delete or remove the photos, well, then we actually have to have both included or loaded into the patient object in order to save changes related to both copies, like both different size copies of the image, right? But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it coming up. Okay, so that's basically our three classes, okay? So we have our two different children here, the patient photo, patient thumbnail. They both relate back to patient. And so inside patient, notice again, there's no I collection here. It's just a single patient photo and patient thumbnail, right? And that's it. Okay, now we'll just come up to data. We'll come into our DB context, medical office context, because we do need DB sets here to make it easy to actually access and work with these collections directly as well. All right, our patient photo becomes our patient photos DB set, patient thumbnails DB set for our collection of patient thumbnail, right? Each one relates back to a patient. Okay, so we need a new migration now because we've made changes to our overall model. So I'm just going to save everything, right? We'll come into our package manager console again. Okay, of course, that's where we installed our Skia Sharp earlier. I'll just get my common commands open because heavens, I don't want to actually have to type anything. It's just painful to watch me do that, I know. So here we go. I'll add migration. I'm going to call it patient uh, photos. Okay, and we'll just let that cook for a second. Hopefully it builds okay. I didn't mess up my copy paste or anything. Looks good. All right. And there we go. So just have a quick look here, okay? Notice we're creating our table, patient photos, right? It has its own integer identity primary key. That's good. That's perfectly fine. But notice here, down here, we do have our foreign key back to the patients, okay? The principal column is ID, relates to our patient ID. Typical one-to-many. Ooh, that's something I didn't talk about. When we modified our DB context, often what we do is after we get our DB sets in, we come down here to the Fluent API and think, okay, do I have to worry about cascade delete and so on? You notice I skipped over that altogether, right? That's because we definitely want the cascade delete default that would be in this arrangement, right? Because if we delete a patient, obviously we would want to also clean up or remove or delete, however you want to put it, the actual uh, images that go along with the patient as well, right? So it's just same thing here for the thumbnail, same cascade delete on the foreign key, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, that's good. So let's just finally, I might as well run update database now. That way I know it's done. And because we're just adding new features and things, not changing anything that was there already, yep, looks like we should be okay. We're getting right through and not having to make any other changes. It's just built the whole thing. All right, good. Okay, so I'll just close up all this. Don't need that anymore. I'm done in the context. And even these classes, I can close all this, come to think of it. So close all tabs. Okay, now I'm going to start working in the views next because one of the big differences between these, I mean, they're still uploaded files. And we talked about uploaded files just before the break week, right? The difference between that is these are still uploaded files, but we want to actually display them, show them on the UI itself, right? So that's going to involve a couple of extra steps. So that's where we're going to focus on the views first before we go further, right? So coming down here to the views, I maybe just shrink things up so I don't get myself confused, which is easily done, right? Okay, the patient ones, those are the ones that I'm focused on here, right? Okay, I'm going to start with the create view. Now, one thing that was mentioned, and this is the most common simple mistake that students make, right, is they forget this one critical part. We talked about this when we were introducing the whole concept of uploading files, and that is that we must include in the opening form tag these attributes. Method is post, and it's most importantly, enclosure type, multi-part form data, right? Uh, there's a size limit on GET requests, so the post just helps make sure that we can get all of our data up there, right? So that's good. So now we are able to transmit the data when we select a file. So we actually want to then create an input. Well, guess what? This is going to look pretty much identical to the inputs we used for the actual uploaded files the other day, right? I'm going to put it right up here at the very top of the first column. Okay, a little form group. Okay, input type is file. Notice that the name is the picture, right? So that's the name we'll use for the parameter to pull the data as a iForm file. Same approach we did with other uploaded files the other day, right? So that's good there. Now, just, from playing with this a little bit earlier, I noticed that we kind of get out of balance here. I've got too many things in this first column and not enough in the second. So while I'm here anyway, I'm just going to cut and paste. This is the input for group for the phone number. I'm going to cut it out of the first column and put it at the top of the second column right above the email. Kind of think looks good that spot and so on. Okay. So believe it or not, that's it. All we really had to do is add this input, right? As well as, of course, our attributes up here for the form itself. We're never going to worry about showing the picture here on the create page. I mean, that's going to come later on after we've actually created the record and uploaded it, right? Okay. So that's good. Now maybe we'll move on to the index view next. So in the index view, we're going to add a new column. Okay, remember we just did this work where we getting past the filter here in the table, where we use the display properties from Bootstrap to decide which ones would be visible at different screen widths and so on, right? So that's already in place here. We have that done. So fortunately, it should give us more room to add this extra column and get away with it, right? So always with a new column, I need both a header, a TH, right? And I can leave it empty because there's really, I don't think I need a caption above these pictures. And it's going to be pretty obvious when you see the screen. Oh, that's the picture for the actual patient, right? So I don't need anything there. But down here in our for each loop, where we create a row for every item, okay, item in the model, of course, the model being the collection, innumerable collection of patients. Each item will be an individual patient. That's where we're going to add our code. And this is our first time looking at code to actually take an image and display it on the screen. So what's involved in that, okay? Well, first of all, we want to make sure we actually have something to show before we try and work with it, right? So just checking here for the item is our patient, the patient thumbnail. Yes, let me emphasize that. We are going to always show thumbnails on the index view. We don't want full size or even larger, medium size, whatever you want to call it, images here, right? We want these nice little tiny wee thumbnail, like hold up your thumb, look at the size that's kind of in front of the screen. That's the size of the image we want here, right? So we're going to make sure when we get the data to show on the index view, that we make sure that this is the one that we include as the thumbnail. So first of all, is it there? And if it has content, then we know we can actually work with it, right? So then what goes on? Well, the web has been able to show images on web pages right from the early days. You're probably familiar with the idea of having like an images folder in the root of the website, right? Where then you just have a link to, the image, it goes in slash images, slash the name of the image and so on. That's one way to get images up on a standard old-fashioned everyday web page. Another thing that's been an option from the early days is this approach where you can say image source, okay, and then you can actually embed the data for the image in a highly compressed text format right into the HTML of the page, right? Advantages and disadvantages? Well, the advantage is that it's right there. You don't have to do another trip back to the server to pull it. Okay. Disadvantage, I can't really think of too much other than you're committed to getting this data, so it can take a little bit longer to get it initially, right? Instead of getting everything else first and then, the image is being brought in after the fact. But in the end, you're pulling the same amount of information from the server. So that's the reaction I sometimes hear from students is, oh, we're pulling all that huge amount of data for the image and putting it right in the web page. Yeah, yeah, exactly. But you know what? You're going to pull that data in the end anyway when you get the image. So it's really not that much different. So with this SRC, this source, how it works is we have to have a string set up in just the right way, right? So you see how we're doing it here. It has to start with this keyword data and a colon. And then we show the MIME type. Yes, that important MIME type that describes what kind of a file we have. Now remember, we looked at a bunch of MIME types just a few minutes ago. Let me bring back up here, if I come up to our utilities again, just to remind us what we're talking about here in resize image. If I go down to the bottom here, right, look at all these MIME types, okay? So these are all the different kind of images that are out there. Now we're going to be focusing on using the WebP, okay, for the most part. But look at all the actual MIME types themselves. What's the common factor you see here is the word image. That's going to come up again in our code in a few minutes. If it contains image, then we know that it's one of the image MIME types, right? So anyway, we need the MIME type for this source business to work properly. So it has data, colon, the MIME type, a semicolon, then indicating the encoding that's used is base64 string, and then we actually pass the data, right? Well, how do we get this data, the image base64? Well, that comes right back to our item. Our item is the patient. We go into the thumbnail and the content. That is our byte array. That's the data we saved when we originally uploaded the file, even after we did any size manipulation. It's still a byte array. That's how we store it in that blob, binary large object in the database. So this converts it to a base64 string, which then provides the data we need to build our image source, and away we go, right? And so it's right there. It's right in the HTML of the page, the actual data to display the image. So it's a nice way to get this up and on the screen. And in the end, it works very, very well, right? Okay, now notice we're also adding like a title. So if you hover over it with your mouse, you'll see profile picture of. We might as well use their full name. And we have the same thing here in the alt as well. So for screen readers and things like that. Okay, just to mention as well, we do have a little bit of Bootstrap formatting here. Nice rounded fluid image, right? Just to give us that little bit of a nice effect as well. So that's it. That's our first look at exactly how we get the data from the database up into a way we can actually display the image on the screen. So coming to the details view next, we're going to do the same thing. The main difference here is instead of the thumbnail, we're going to use the larger version, right? So I'm going to stick it up here right above the description list, okay? Right under this HR tag. I'm going to put my bit of code here. It's essentially the same idea. Again, we check, do we have the patient photo? So if we're going to show details, the link query will include the patient photo instead of the thumbnail, right? And if we actually have it and we have some content that's not null, then we're going to do the same thing, right? Of course, we're just pulling the data from the model. Notice it's model instead of item because our, our model for the page is a single patient, not a collection of patients, right? So it's model.patient photo, okay? And there we go. Notice I'm sticking a little HR to match that one right underneath the image, and then that will be right above all the other data on the actual details. Okay, now how about edit? Edit is going to be the same except when we go to edit, remember there's more than one thing. We're not just going to display it, but they might want to they say, oh, you know what? I don't like that picture. I want to choose a different one. Or the person who created the record accidentally uploaded the wrong picture, right? Oh, gosh, we got to replace that with the correct profile picture for the patient, right? Or maybe we just need to delete it, okay? Remove the image, right? So we have all those different options we need to take care of here in edit, okay? We might want to remove it, delete it, I should say, replace it, okay, or just leave it alone, okay? So what we're going to do here, well, first of all, before we forget, one of the most important things and one of the most commonly forgotten, if we're going to upload images, we can't forget to put in our form attributes here, right? Method is post and enclosure type multi-part form data. Okay. Now, I'm going to actually come down and get the code in place. Okay, I'm going to put it for displaying the image. I'm going to put it actually even right above the form tag under this HR. It doesn't have to be in the form, okay? But notice we're adding one extra thing here. I decided to create a little Boolean, okay, has picture. So I go and I check that patient photo for the model content, making sure that it's there and that it actually has content. And that will be true or false has picture because I'm going to have multiple things I'm going to do only if we actually have a picture. So then I can check if has picture, then do our usual way of displaying it. Notice we're doing the same code we had on details, model, patient photo, the larger version of the photo, and so on, right? Okay, so that sits above the form. Now, down inside the form, right? I'm going to do right before we actually start the row. So it kind of sits right under the image anyway. I'm going to throw in a little div here that actually will contain that checkbox option for removing the image, okay? So if it has a picture, so if there is no picture, I don't want to even show the checkbox, right? If it has a picture, right, then we're going to basically have a input, okay? Now I'm using some nice Bootstrap formatting here for these checkboxes, right? And a nice strong name, check to remove image beside it. But the thing to remember here is that the name of this checkbox is CHK remove image. So just recall for a moment how checkboxes work in a web page. If it's checked, then you get the name value pair submitted when you submit the form. If it's not checked, it's not mentioned, right? It's not in the data whatsoever. So we really don't have to worry so much about the value, just if the name value pair is even there, right, in the collection of data submitted with the form, then we know it was checked. Okay, so that gives us the option to just say, no, we don't want to replace it, but we want to delete it or remove it, whichever way you want to put it. Now, of course, if we do want to replace it, we're going to do the same thing we did with create. We want to actually come down here and have an input group, right? Where we can then go and select a new picture to replace it. I guess I could say here replace picture file, but I think it's clear enough. The intention is just to actually get the choose a new file that we're going to upload, and that will be the new picture. Okay. So just before I forget, I want it to be the same arrangement. So just as I did on the create, I'm going to move the phone number from the bottom of the first column, cut that out of here, and put it in on the top of the second column right above the email address, right? Just so our create and our edit pages match each other in terms of the arrangement of the input controls. Okay, so believe it or not, that's all the changes to the different uh, views themselves, right? Now, the rest of our work is going to be in the patient controller here. So let's come up to the controllers and come into patient here. All right. Now, one of the first things I want to give consideration to is including the data wherever we want to show it, right? We want to make sure we do the correct include for the situation. So here in the index action, right, here is where I want to include which, obviously, the thumbnail, right? So the order of the includes doesn't matter here, so I can just stick it right there. Include the patient thumbnail. So whenever I go and get all my patients, right, I'll include the thumbnail for each one, that thumbnail image. Now, of course, if it doesn't exist, then there just won't be one provided. It doesn't cause an error or anything like that. Okay. All right. So coming down in details and both edit actions, we want to include as well, but we'll include the larger size image. Okay, our patient photo instead. Right? So it doesn't really matter. I'll just include it there. Okay, so that's in the details. Now, we don't have to worry about create because we never show it on the create pages, right? Or create page. But here in edit, when we first want to display, we want to provide that photo. And then when we go and get the patient to update, same thing, right? So we've included it now, okay, one version or the other, depending on which one we want to show, in all of the link queries that go and retrieve patient data. All right. Now, we're going to do something similar to what we've done when we have uh, methods that we're going to use more than once in different spots. We're going to create a little method as a standalone chunk of code here. So let me just get my code out of the copy paste file, and we'll bring it in and we'll talk about it here in Visual Studio. Okay, so this method, I'm just calling it add picture. Okay, it's private, async is just a task. Okay, what do we pass it? We give it the patient object. Okay, and we give it the uploaded data, the iForm file. Now don't worry, we will go back and we'll actually add that parameter to make sure we have it in both the post for create and for edit. So if they've uploaded a file, we'll have it and we can pass it in here. All right. Now, of course, the first thing to check is, do we actually have that? Okay. If we don't, there's nothing to do and we're done. We're out of here, right? Uh, as I said, we're going to save it in two different sizes. I have that in my comment. So we actually have it uploaded. So we'll get the content type. That's our MIME type, right? Right from the iForm file that was uploaded. We'll get the length. That's just a way we can check and make sure that somebody didn't just try and upload an empty file, right? So we make sure that we do have a MIME type and we do have some data in the actual content of the file, right? And that's good. Then we had talked about this when we did our discussion of uploading files in general. Here we're going to say, well, I don't care, what kind of file you uploaded, but it's got to be one of those different images, right? Remember, we have all these different MIME types for different types of image, but the common thing is the word image is in every single one, right? So that's why here I can just say, hey, the MIME type contains image, and then whatever the image format is, I can work with it, right? I can work with any of them. It doesn't matter. Okay, but this way, if they uploaded a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet or even a Notepad file, okay, then this will say, no, this isn't an image. I'm not interested. We aren't going to do anything with it. So we just skip over the rest of the code. But if we actually do have an image, any of the allowed images, that's fine, right? So this is similar to what we did with our uploaded files before. We use a memory stream. We take the iForm file, copy to our memory stream asynchronously, right? And then we can just take that memory stream to array, and that gives us our byte array. So I'm storing that right here, we call it picture array. That's the actual byte array itself, okay? Now we have to decide, because there is a difference in the approach we have to do. Are we replacing or just creating a brand new one, okay? So what I'm doing here, I'm making an assumption. Yes, I know it's a little bit dangerous whenever you make assumptions, but if there's a patient photo, because I always create or delete both at the same time, I'm going to assume that there's also the thumbnail. Okay, just be aware that we're making that assumption. So I'm checking if the patient photo is not null, then hey, we've already uploaded. Maybe it happened in Create or in an earlier edit, but we have uploaded an image for this patient photo, right? And of course the thumbnail as well. So really what we're going to do, we already have pictures. So in that case, all we have to do is replace the byte array, the actual .content property of the patient photo. So here's where I call my shrink image WebP, okay? Passing the picture array, that's the byte array we got from up here, right? And this is the size I've decided to set, okay? So for the max height and max width, I'm doing 500 by 600, right? That's a nice, reasonable size, still, image. It's much bigger than a thumbnail, right? But it's a reasonable size that I found from experimenting a bit. If you want to use something different, if your client wants a little bigger or a little smaller, you can change these values. But I found that this works reasonably well. And that's it. So we're done with the patient photo. We've replaced the content. MIME type is going to be the same because we're always working with WebP as the MIME type. That's how we're setting up our approach here, right? So we've replaced the content with the new uh, shrunken down image. Now, of course, we know we talked about this already. If you upload a picture that's smaller than this these values, it won't increase it, right? It'll just be the new content, and away we go. Now, is where it gets a little bit tricky, and this is why we need to handle it separately if we're replacing, okay? If that's the situation, we can't replace the thumbnail until we actually include it. So we have to go to a patient thumbnail, and go and get it from the database. So here, that's why one reason we actually created our separate DB contexts for patient photos and patient thumbnails is now I can query, go directly to the patient thumbnails, and I can identify it because the foreign key value, the patient ID, matches the primary key of our patient, right? And that goes and gets that one, and that will actually then load the thumbnail into the patient. So now we actually do have both versions loaded in our patient object. Now we can replace the content. Okay, once again, we'll call our shrink image WebP with a much smaller size. I find these numbers work fairly well for a thumbnail image, okay? 75 and 90, right? Okay, and that gives us our new data then. So when we go and save the patient, because this has been updated inside the patient object, it will work, right? Now, else, there's no picture saved, so we don't have to worry about going and getting anything because there's nothing there. So all we do is we create our new patient photo, okay, shrinking it to the right size. We set the MIME type, and that's it. Okay, that's our patient photo. Same thing for the thumbnail, just obviously making it a slightly smaller size, okay, for the thumbnail size image. Now the saving of it happens, of course, when we actually save the patient object. All right, so we're going to call this add patient from both the create and the update process. So let's get back to the other actions here. So I'm going to go way up, start with the create. Okay, here's our create post. So I'm just going to push enter here to bring everything down so we can see it nicely on the screen. All right, and maybe even I'll do that once more. Okay, so we do need a new parameter here, right? We're going to be uploading this iForm file, okay, which is named the picture, right? That's how we set it up in the HTML of the page. It's called the picture. So that gives us the data that was uploaded, right? So then all we have to do, we would do this actually after we've checked for validation. So if the model state is valid, but before we actually call save changes, okay, or even add the patient and save changes, here is where we'll add the picture to the patient. So we pass the patient object, we pass the iForm file, the picture. So we add it then we add the revised patient containing the actual data for the two different images, okay, different sized image, and then we save changes. And that's it, okay? Now, a bit of a note here, it's right in my copy paste file, and I want to emphasize it again. Retry limit exceeded exception. Even if it wasn't for any other reason, by now this is a hierarchical object. If we've added a picture, okay, then the patient as a class or an object actually contains other objects, right, in those properties. So we have to make sure that we have a retry exceeded exception catch here because we know what the DB context will do. As an abstraction of the database, what it will do okay, is it will actually generate all the SQL in a large transaction to make sure that all the changes we make to the patient, okay, and these related objects all happen successfully. It'll try that transaction repeatedly. By default, I think it's 5 times. And then after that, it will throw this retry limit exceeded because it retried it too many times, right? So you have to make sure that you have that catch block whenever you're working with a hierarchical object as we are here. But fortunately, we already had it for other reasons, right? Okay, so moving down now to edit. Same thing here in the edit post. We need not one though this time, we actually need 2 parameters, okay, as we pass data to the edit post, right? Maybe I'll push enter just so that we're down on the next line. So the 2 parameters this time are because we might have that checkbox, right? Where they just have checked off that they want to remove the image, okay? As well as, of course, they might have uploaded a new picture that we're going to use to replace the existing one, okay? Or maybe there wasn't one there and they're just uploading an image for the first time. We can handle both, no problem. But we need the 2 parameters. And then inside the try block here, right? Again, before we save changes, we're going to add some code. This code then will do a couple things, right, to handle those 2 different scenarios. Did they check off remove image, right? So remember again how the checkbox works. If they've checked it off, then the name value pair is included. I don't really care about the value. If you do, you can feel free to set a breakpoint and examine this and see what the value is, right? But if it's there, it means it's checked, okay? So if they check that off, then we'll come here. Now we have to do the same kind of thing. The change tracker needs to be able to know that we actually have the patient thumbnail so that when we set it to null, it will know to go and delete it. So we do the same kind of a link query going into the context, patient thumbnails, okay, where the foreign key matches the ID of the patient that we're working with here, our patient update. So that loads the patient thumbnail. Again, that's necessary so the change tracker will be able to manage deleting it. And then this is kind of magical. Look at that. All we do is we set both of these properties, these objects contained inside our patient update, equal to null. And the change tracker then will know that, hey, guess what? When we save our patient update, we actually have to go and delete out of the database these 2 objects, okay, in their respective tables, right? Okay, and that's how we actually remove it. Now the else branch here, okay, we just call our add picture with our patient update and the picture, and that will upload it or replace it depending on, save it, I should say, save it or replace it depending on the situation. And that's it. Believe it or not, that's all we have to do. So let's go ahead and run this and try it out. Okay, so here we are. So we're on the patient index now. It looks like there might be a little bit of extra space here, but really nothing significant yet, right? So I'm going to do edit first because it's a lot quicker and easier to do edit. But here we have our picture file. So I can choose file, right? And pick a file that I want to use here. And I can just click save. And there it is. We've gone to details with this nice, large, fairly large size, okay, uh, picture or photograph of our patient, right? I can go back to the patient list now, the index, and there's our little thumbnail version. There we go. All right, let's do another one just for fun. Um, Pick a different photograph maybe. And there it is, the large version. And there's our thumbnail there, right? So not everyone needs to have, okay, an image, that's for sure, but the ones that do now actually have that available. All right, now does it work on create? We should just quickly test. I'm gonna have to go through and pick a bunch of values here, right? OHIP number. Got to be careful because obviously that one's been used before. So try something that's different. Let's see, David. Oh, look at that. I wish. No, actually, I don't really wish that. But anyway, 5 visits per year. Phone number. That looks good. Email. Sure, why not? Check off a couple things here, just for the fun of it. I'll be in a medical trial. My doctor is. I'm going to choose Charles Xavier. Okay. There we go. And there's my my picture. And oh, of course I don't see myself yet, but if I filter by doctor, well, who's my doctor? Charles Xavier, right? There we go. So there's the image with the picture and so on. And that's it. So it's working, and we actually have successfully got the images up here and so on. Of course, if I go to details, I get the full size. Let's go back here. I can go into edit. If I just check to remove image, right? Click save. There we go. And we see it's gone here. If I go back to the patient list, isn't that nice, the fact that it remembers our filter, right? So the record, we're still on the right records here, and I can see that it's gone from here as well. All right, that's good. So that basically shows us everything we need to. Now, just for fun though, I just want to show you that uh, this is actually using, it's not shrinking it or making it bigger or smaller. It's just showing it as the data comes, right? What if we didn't shrink this down as much as we did? What I'm going to do is, I think I can do this without even stopping running. I'm going to come down in the controller here to where we add picture. Just going to temporarily make a change here. Is that if I'm replacing the picture, right? I'm going to say patient photo equals, well, you know what? I'm just going to use the full size picture array that's uploaded. So I'll put that in place, semicolon, comment out the rest. Okay. So if I edit and replace it with a picture, it's going to save in the content of the photo the full size image that I've uploaded, right? So let me just come back here to the browser. Okay, so I'm going to edit. We will just browse for a new image. So I've got some really nice big ones here. Let's try this one for fun. Okay. Now, you see how big that is? Now, the truth is, it's still being constrained, right? It's being constrained by the fact that this is in a container. Well, where's that container come from? Let's come over here. If I bring up views, shared, remember our layout page, underscore layout, okay, this partial view, that actually is kind of the host for all of our individual views through this render body approach. Well, see, there's a container here. If I take that out, okay, and do a hot reload, let's just see the effect now. Okay, so now it's gotten even bigger. Like I actually have to scroll a little bit to see it all. And it's still being constrained to some degree, right, by the browser itself. But let's just try a different one. I think this is a pretty big picture. Okay, yeah. So you see this one, right? Yeah. So do we need a picture this big? Clearly not, right? Definitely don't. Okay, so let me come back here. I'll just undo here. Let's come back over, undo. Okay, so I put it back the way it should be, right? So once more, if I come down, edit, and choose a different file, even if I choose the same file, this time around, it shrunk it down to our 500 by 600 size, right? There we go. So that is the actual image size as it's stored in the database now. So you can see the effect, right? Lots of flexibility. You can hopefully understand exactly how this is working. Let's just test finally our responsiveness. Okay, so you notice how our columns are appearing and disappearing, but even as we get really small, see just the responsive nature of even the bootstrap styling of the image. See how it's getting a little bit smaller there as well. Okay, even Wilma is harder to see, but yeah. So that's nice bootstrap responsiveness working in our favor there as well. All right, well that finishes the demo on step 15.